His tool was hard as a rock while he saw both of us playing around. "Hello everyone, I'm Patty. And trust me, you're going to want to hear how this night turns out." Imagine this. The room is glowing with soft candlelight, and the dinner? Well, it's really just the beginning. The air is charged with something you can't quite put your finger on, and every look across the table says there's more to come. We had been dating for a few months, and things had been going so well. I felt like the luckiest girl in the world to have found someone like Daniel. He was everything I had ever wanted, charming, handsome, and he had this way of making me laugh even on the darkest days. So, naturally, I wanted to make this Valentine's Day unforgettable, I remember the excitement that buzzed through me as I prepared. I'd planned a beautiful meal, his favorite dishes. My parents had agreed to leave the house for the evening, giving us the entire place to ourselves. It was going to be perfect. I even bought a bottle of wine, which was a bit of a risk considering we were both underage, but I wanted everything to be perfect, as the day approached, I couldn't help but notice that Daniel seemed distant. He still smiled and said all the right things, but there was something in his eyes that felt off. I tried to push those feelings away. It was Valentine's Day, after all. I was probably just overthinking things, that evening, I was a bundle of nerves and excitement as I finished setting the table. Everything looked beautiful, the candles flickered softly, and the aroma of the food filled the air. I couldn't wait to see the look on his face when he walked in, when Daniel arrived. He looked a little tired, but he still gave me that smile that always melted my heart. We sat down to dinner, and for a moment, everything was perfect. We laughed, talked about our days, and shared stories about our past. But as the night went on, I could feel the distance between us growing, it was subtle at first, a missed joke here, a distracted glance there. But then, halfway through the meal, I noticed something that made my heart sink. His phone, which he had placed face down on the table, began to buzz. Once, then again, and then a third time. He reached for it instinctively but then paused, as if realizing something, "Is everything okay?" I asked, trying to keep my voice light, "Yeah, just work stuff," he replied, but his eyes were evasive, I tried to ignore it, but the pit in my stomach grew. The buzzing continued, and I could see his unease growing. Finally, he picked up the phone, looked at the screen, and then quickly put it back down, I wanted to believe him. I really did. But something didn't feel right. The rest of the dinner passed in a blur, with me trying to act normal while my mind raced with questions. When we finally finished, I suggested we move to the living room. Maybe some time on the couch, cuddled up with a movie, would bring back the connection that seemed to be slipping away, but even as we sat together, I could feel him pulling further away. I tried to snuggle closer, but his body felt stiff. The tension between us was becoming unbearable, and then it happened, his phone buzzed again, and this time, I couldn't stop myself. I reached over and grabbed it before he could. His reaction was instant, he tried to take it back, but I held on, my heart pounding in my chest. "Daniel, what's going on?" I demanded, my voice trembling, he hesitated, and in that moment, I knew. I just knew, "Please, just give me the phone," he said quietly, his eyes pleading, but it was too late. I unlocked the screen, and there it was. A message from a number I didn't recognize, with words that made my heart shatter into a million pieces. "Happy Valentine's Day, babe. I can't wait until we can be together for real, I stared at the words, my mind struggling to process what I was seeing. How could this be happening? How could everything I thought we had been a lie? Who is she?" I whispered, barely able to get the words out, Daniel didn't answer. He just sat there, his face pale, his eyes full of guilt, "Who is she, Daniel?" I asked again, louder this time, he finally spoke, his voice low and filled with regret. "Her name is Emily. We've been seeing each other for a while now. I was going to tell you, but I didn't want to ruin tonight, ruin tonight?" I repeated, disbelief and anger flooding through me. "You've been cheating on me, and you're worried about ruining tonight?" He didn't say anything, and in that silence, everything I had been feeling, the doubt, the fear, the sadness, turned into something else. Betrayal. Pure, raw betrayal, I threw his phone back at him and stood up, unable to be near him any longer. "Get out," I said, my voice shaking with emotion, please, let me explain, he started, but I cut him off, there's nothing to explain. Just go, he stood there for a moment, looking like he wanted to say more, but then he nodded and left, the door closing behind him with a finality that echoed in my heart, as soon as he was gone, I collapsed on the couch, the tears I had been holding back finally breaking free. How could this have happened? How could the person I trusted most betray me like this? I don't know how long I cried, but eventually, the tears stopped. And as I sat there in the dark, the reality of what had just happened began to sink in. The person I loved, the person I had planned my future with, was gone. And he wasn't coming back, but as painful as it was, I knew one thing for sure, my story wasn't over yet. My story isn't over yet. Please consider subscribing to the channel, thank you. Back to the story. This was just the beginning, the days that followed were some of the hardest of my life. Everywhere I looked, there were reminders of Daniel, his toothbrush in the bathroom, the sweatshirt he'd left on my bed, the pictures of us smiling together on my phone. It was like my entire world had been turned upside down, and I didn't know how to make sense of any of it, but I had to keep going. Life doesn't stop just because your heart is broken, I threw myself into work and school, trying to distract myself from the pain. My friends rallied around me, offering their support, and while I appreciated it, nothing could really take away the emptiness I felt inside. Nights were the worst, lying in bed, staring at the ceiling, my mind replaying every moment with Daniel, trying to figure out where things had gone wrong, it wasn't long before the news spread. Our breakup became the talk of the town. Small communities thrive on gossip, after all. I heard all sorts of stories about Daniel and his new girlfriend, Emily. Some people said they'd been together for months, others claimed it was just a fling. But none of it mattered to me. All that mattered was that he had betrayed me, and I was left to pick up the pieces, One evening, about a month after our breakup, I was scrolling through my phone when I stumbled upon an old video of us. We were at a beach, laughing and joking around, completely oblivious to the storm that was brewing just beneath the surface. Watching it, I felt a mixture of sadness and anger. How could he have done this to me? How could he have pretended to love me while he was with someone else? But as the video played on, I realized something. I wasn't the same person I was in that video. That girl was naive, trusting, and completely unprepared for what life had thrown at her. But now, I was stronger. I had been through the worst, and I was still standing, it was time to move on, a few weeks later, I decided to make some changes in my life. I started by redecorating my room, getting rid of anything that reminded me of Daniel. I bought new bedding, rearranged the furniture, and filled the space with things that made me happy. It was a small change, but it made a big difference. It felt like I was reclaiming my life, piece by piece, I also started going to the gym. At first, it was just a way to get out of the house, but soon it became something more. The physical exertion helped me clear my mind, and the progress I made gave me a sense of accomplishment that I hadn't felt in a long time. Plus, I started meeting new people who didn't know about my past, who saw me for who I was now, not who I had been with Daniel. One of those people was Alex, Alex was one of the trainers at the gym, and we quickly became friends. He was funny, easy to talk to, and he had a way of making me feel good about myself, something I hadn't felt in a long time. We started hanging out more and more, grabbing coffee after workouts, going for walks in the park, and just talking about everything and anything, it wasn't long before I started to develop feelings for him. At first, I tried to push them away. After all, I wasn't ready for another relationship, especially not after what had happened with Daniel. But the more time I spent with Alex, the harder it became to deny what I was feeling, then, one day, as we were sitting in a cafe, laughing about something silly, he looked at me in a way that made my heart skip a beat, why are you looking at me like that? I asked, my voice tinged with nervousness. Because I like you, he replied, his eyes full of sincerity. I've liked you for a while now, but I didn't want to push you. I know you've been through a lot, and I didn't want to make things complicated, I was silent for a moment, trying to process what he had just said. Part of me was scared of getting hurt again, scared of opening up to someone new. But another part of me was excited. Alex was different. He was kind, caring, and he made me feel like I was worth something, I like you too, I finally admitted, My voice barely above a whisper, he smiled, a smile that made my heart feel lighter than it had in months. Then let's take it slow. We don't have to rush into anything. I just want to get to know you better, and see where things go, and that's what we did. We took things slow, really slow. We spent time together, getting to know each other, building a foundation of trust and understanding. It wasn't always easy. There were moments when I felt like pulling away, moments when the fear of getting hurt again was almost too much to bear. But Alex was patient, always reassuring me that we were in this together, and slowly, but surely, I started to believe him, fast forward a couple of years, and my life had changed completely. I was happier, more confident, and in a relationship with someone who genuinely cared about me. Alex and I had grown closer over time, and while we weren't rushing into anything, I could see a future with him, something I hadn't been able to imagine with anyone since Daniel. But just when I thought I had left my past behind, life threw me a curveball. It was Valentine's Day again, 2 years since that fateful night when everything had fallen apart. Alex had planned a special evening for us, and I was looking forward to spending it with him. We decided to go out for dinner, to a cozy little restaurant that had recently opened in town. It was the perfect setting. Intimate, with soft lighting and a warm atmosphere, as we walked in, hand in hand, I felt a sense of peace. This was where I was meant to be. This was what love was supposed to feel like, safe, secure, and full of possibilities, but as we were shown to our table, my heart nearly stopped, there, across the room, serving a table of diners, was Emily. The same Emily who had been with Daniel. The same Emily who had unwittingly shattered my heart. And she was visibly pregnant, her swollen belly unmistakable beneath her uniform, for a moment, I couldn't breathe. The past came rushing back, and all the old emotions, anger, hurt, betrayal, flooded my mind. What was she doing here? Why was she working as a waitress in this small town? And where was Daniel? As if sensing my discomfort, Alex squeezed my hand. "Are you okay?" he asked, his voice full of concern. I forced a smile and nodded. "Yeah, I'm fine. Just surprised to see someone I know, we took our seats, but I couldn't focus on the menu or the conversation. My eyes kept drifting back to Emily, watching as she moved between tables, her face a mask of professionalism. She didn't see me, or if she did, she didn't acknowledge it. But I couldn't shake the feeling that this was some sort of cosmic joke, a reminder that no matter how far I had come, the past was always lurking just around the corner, as the evening went on, I tried to push the thoughts away, focusing on Alex and the wonderful time we were having. But it was hard to ignore the questions swirling in my mind. What had happened to Daniel? Why wasn't he here with her? And why did seeing her again affect me so much? Finally, as we were finishing our meal, I couldn't take it anymore. I excused myself from the table and made my way to the bathroom, needing a moment to collect myself, but as I walked past the kitchen, I heard a familiar voice. A voice I hadn't heard in 2 years. A voice that sent a chill down my spine, Daniel, he was standing by the kitchen door, talking to one of the chefs, looking just as handsome as I remembered. But there was something different about him, something that made him seem older, more tired. He hadn't seen me yet, and for a moment, I considered turning around and walking away. But before I could, he looked up, and our eyes met, there was a flicker of recognition, followed by surprise, and then something else, something I couldn't quite place, "Sarah," he said, his voice uncertain, as if he couldn't believe it was really me, I stood frozen in place, my mind racing. What was I supposed to say? How was I supposed to act? This was the man who had broken my heart, the man who had left me in pieces. And now, here he was, standing in front of me, as if the last 2 years hadn't happened, but they had happened. I wasn't the same girl he had left behind. I was stronger now. I had moved on. I had found someone who loved me for who I was, not for who they wanted me to be, "Daniel," I finally replied, my voice steady. "It's been a long time, yeah," he said, looking a little lost. "It has, there was an awkward silence, and for a moment, I considered just walking away. But something inside me wouldn't let me leave it like this. I needed closure. I needed to know, so, I said, trying to keep my tone casual, "How are things?" "How's, Emily?" He hesitated, and in that hesitation, I saw everything I needed to see. The guilt, the regret, the sadness. Things didn't work out, he admitted, his voice barely above a whisper. We tried, but it wasn't meant to be, I nodded, feeling a strange mix of emotions. Part of me wanted to feel sorry for him, but another part of me felt vindicated. This was the man who had chosen someone else over me, who had thought the grass was greener on the other side. And now, here he was, alone and working in a restaurant, while I was with someone who truly cared about me, but as much as I wanted to rub it in, I didn't. I wasn't that person anymore, I'm sorry to hear that, I said sincerely. But I hope you find happiness, Daniel. I really do, he looked at me, his eyes filled with something I couldn't quite place. You look good, Sarah. Happy, I am, I replied, a smile tugging at the corners of my mouth. I really am, with that, I turned and walked away, leaving Daniel and the past behind me. As I made my way back to the table, I felt a sense of closure that I hadn't felt in a long time. The chapter with Daniel was finally over. I was free, the encounter with Daniel and Emily left me feeling strangely at peace. It was like a weight had been lifted off my shoulders, a weight I hadn't even realized I was carrying. For so long, I had been haunted by the memories of what had happened, by the pain and betrayal. But now, seeing them again, seeing how their lives had turned out, I realized that I had moved on. I had grown. I was stronger, wiser, and happier than I had ever been, Alex noticed the change in me too. After that night, he told me how proud he was of how far I had come, how I had handled the situation with grace and maturity. His support meant the world to me, and it made me realize just how lucky I was to have him in my life, we continued to build our relationship, taking things one day at a time. We traveled together, explored new hobbies, and spent countless nights talking about our dreams for the future. And the more time I spent with Alex, the more I knew that he was the one I wanted to spend the rest of my life with, it wasn't long before we started talking about the future in more concrete terms, marriage, a home, maybe even a family. It was exciting, and a little scary, but mostly it felt right. I had found someone who loved me for who I was, someone who made me feel safe, cherished, and valued, and so, a year later, on a beautiful spring day, Alex got down on one knee and asked me to marry him. And, of course, I said yes, our wedding was everything I had ever dreamed of, simple, elegant, and filled with the people we loved most. As I stood at the altar, looking into Alex's eyes, I couldn't help but think about how far I had come. From that heartbroken girl on Valentine's Day to the woman standing here, ready to start a new chapter with the man of her dreams, and as we exchanged our vows, promising to love and cherish each other for the rest of our lives, I knew that my story wasn't over yet. There were still so many chapters left to write, so many adventures to be had. But for the first time in a long time, I wasn't afraid of what the future might hold. I was ready, life has a funny way of surprising you when you least expect it. Just when I thought my story was complete, that I had found my happy ending, fate decided to throw one last curveball my way, it was a few months after the wedding. Alex and I were settling into married life, enjoying our time together and planning for the future. One day, out of the blue, I received a message on social media. It was from Emily, I hesitated before opening it, unsure of what she could possibly want. Part of me wanted to ignore it, to leave the past in the past. But curiosity got the better of me, and I clicked on the message, Hi, Sarah. I hope you're doing well. I know this is out of the blue, but I've been thinking a lot about you lately, and I feel like I owe you an apology. I know I played a part in the pain you went through with Daniel, and I'm truly sorry for that. I never meant to hurt you, and I regret how everything turned out. I've been through a lot since then, and it's made me realize how important it is to make amends. If you're open to it, I'd love to meet up and talk. No pressure, of course. I just wanted to reach out. Best, Emily, I stared at the message, my mind racing. This was the last thing I had expected. After everything that had happened, after all the pain and heartache, Emily was reaching out to apologize. Part of me wanted to delete the message and move on, but another part of me felt like this was an opportunity for closure, real closure, after talking it over with Alex, I decided to meet with her. We arranged to meet at a cafe, and as I sat there waiting for her to arrive, I couldn't help but feel nervous. What would she say? What did she want from me? When Emily walked in, I barely recognized her. She looked tired, worn down by life, and there was a sadness in her eyes that hadn't been there before. As she sat down across from me, I could see that this wasn't going to be easy for her, "Thank you for meeting with me," she said, her voice soft, "I wasn't sure if I should," I admitted. "But I'm glad you reached out, she nodded, taking a deep breath before speaking. "I've made a lot of mistakes in my life, Sarah. And one of the biggest was getting involved with Daniel while he was with you. I was young, selfish, and I didn't think about how my actions would affect anyone else. But I've had a lot of time to think about it, and I realize now how wrong I was, I listened as she talked, surprised by the honesty and vulnerability in her words. She told me about how things had fallen apart with Daniel, how she had struggled to make ends meet after they broke up, and how she had ended up working as a waitress to support herself and her child. It hadn't been easy, and she had learned a lot of hard lessons along the way. "I'm not telling you this to make you feel sorry for me," she said, her eyes filled with sincerity. "I just wanted you to know that I regret everything. I'm truly sorry for the pain I caused you, and I hope you can find it in your heart to forgive me, As I listened to her, I felt a strange sense of peace. This was the closure I hadn't realized I needed. Emily's apology didn't erase the past, but it did help me put it to rest. I could see that she had changed, that she had learned from her mistakes, and I respected her for having the courage to reach out, "I forgive you," I said, meaning it. "We've all made mistakes. What's important is that we learn from them and move forward, Tears welled up in her eyes, and she smiled, a genuine, grateful smile. "Thank you, Sarah. That means more to me than you know, We talked for a little while longer, sharing stories about our lives and how far we had come. When we finally parted ways, I felt lighter, as if a burden I had been carrying for years had finally been lifted, As I walked home, I realized that this was the final twist in my story, the one I hadn't seen coming. It wasn't about revenge or retribution. It was about forgiveness, healing, and moving on. Emily and I had both made our share of mistakes, but we had grown from them, and that was what mattered. Before you leave, remember to subscribe.